We made it happen. Jimmy was an incredible success. I don't know where he is. I gotta find him. Gosh, I don't. Oh.
Oh yeah, George. Oh, George.
Right
George.
here. Yeah.
We did it, brother.
Yes, we
hey,
did.
Thanks to Dan. You know what? And in the ring with Dan and Benny. Hey, brother, man, he's about the most cat. I just love him to death. I love you. Thanks for having me. Hey, you're the best. I'm telling you, brother. In the ring with
Dan and Benny.
Yeah.
We love you. Thank you so much.
Dan.
Mwah.
Oh yeah.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring. I'm Dan Sebastiano, joined as always by the original Long Island Iced B himself, Benny Scala. Benny, for those, we're recording this on a Thursday. It's August 24th. The episode will air, will be us next Tuesday. About 20 minutes, give or take, 20, 30 minutes before we got to the air, the story broke tragically. Triple H posted out he received a call from the Rotunda family that Wyndham Rotunda, known to the wrestling world as Bray Wyatt, tragically and unexpectedly passed away today. And we didn't even get through discussing our intro, which involves more people passing away. The wrestling business is just been, it's been rough. And I know we talk about the modern product a lot, mostly in an unfavorable light, but we always said that Bray Wyatt was one of the few modern wrestlers, along with someone like a Gunther and LA Knight, CM Punk, who we genuinely believed could have easily survived and thrived in the territory days. And obviously great family lineage. So our thoughts from the Dan and Benny show go out to the family. Like I said, we're recording this on a Thursday, the day the news broke. By the time this episode airs, I'm sure more information will come out. So we apologize for not being as up to date as we could be, but I did want to address it because it's a name that's come up on the show a lot. But Benny, we have I really have no positive transition. Usually we try and do a little banter. It seems in poor taste now. But we have a really interesting story to talk about today. So why don't you tell everybody who's on the phone with us, because this is probably going to be one of our more unique episodes we've ever done.
Well, Dan, so we're 2.5 years in, and this is actually episode number 140 of Dan and Benny in the Ring. And in that time, we've had Hall of Fame wrestlers, main event wrestlers, enhancement talent wrestlers, indie wrestlers, authors, publishers, referees, and promoters. And then many of the wrestlers had post-wrestling careers and occupations such as postal workers, newspaper business, and as in the case of our last guest, Bugsy McGraw, nursing. But now we can add a pastor, and our guest just isn't any pastor. He's the author of the phenomenal book, The Masked Saint, Husband, Pastor, Hero, later made into a movie of the same name, Dr. Chris Whaley. And Dr. Chris, welcome to Dan and Benny in the Ring.
Hey, Dan and Benny, man. It's great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
We appreciate your time, and we appreciate you being here. When Benny, I give you 100% of the credit here. When he first pitched the idea, absolutely, this was great because yours is such a unique story in the wrestling business. And Benny, as such, I mean, this was your idea to put this show together. First questions to you. What do you got?
Well, Chris, normally we ask our guests how they were bitten by the wrestling bug, but given that we just talked about Bray Wyatt, but within the last couple of days, we also lost two legends, and Terry Funk and Abe Jacobs. And curious as to your thoughts on these two gentlemen. Did you have any interaction with them during your career as a wrestler? And what was your opinion of them as a fan?
Well, Abe Jacobs was phenomenal. He was a great athlete. He was a great amateur athlete. He was a great pro. He died at 95.
Right.
And so I watched him as a kid. I got to see him in person several times. By the time I got into wrestling, he had gone on to other things by that time. But he was really quite a story. You know, he was influential in helping kickstart the career of Ric Flair. He put Flair over in the early '70s, and it was a big deal. You know, Flair taking a win from an older, established wrestler like Jacobs, and you know, I never heard any negative thing about him. Everything I always heard about Dave Jacobs was very positive. And of course, you know, he's a New Zealander, and he had that move that no one else has ever been able to replicate, the Kiwi roll.
Yes, master Kiwi roll.
Yeah. So he was just an unbelievable athlete and just a great guy. I think he ended up in the Carolinas and lived the rest of his life out there. Terry Funk, you know, the only guy that I can compare him to as far as the bumps that he took is Mick Foley. I mean, I saw Terry do, you know, backflip on concrete floor. The only one that could compare to him in interviews, of course, was Ric Flair. He was quite a guy. I never got to work against him. I was actually his brother's pastor for a short while. My second church was up close to the Ocala area, and of course Dory lives in Ocala, and Dory's wife Marty, her dad was actually a Southern Baptist minister also, and I had Marty's dad preach for me once whenever I was out of the pulpit, and you know, just got to spend some great time with Dory and Marty. I actually did a benefit back in '93 for a lady who was dying with cancer, and I got out in '88, so this was you know, 6 years after I'd gotten out of wrestling, and I was a pastor, and so I was still in pretty good shape. I mean, I'm, you know, 93. I was still 39 at that time, and I talked to Dory about, you know, putting this benefit on. He was a big help. He worked against Rick Rude in that match that we set up for them, and had Bugsy McGraw on it, Dick Slater.
Oh, okay.
Had the Barbarian. Had some great names on there. And Dory said, he said, "Why don't you call Terry and see if Terry will come work?" And I said, I really don't want to call Terry. And he said, "Yeah, call him." And so I called him up, and he answered. He answered the phone. "Howdy, partner." And I said,
"That's a good Terry Funk."
I said, "Hey, Terry, this is Chris Whaley." "Who?" "Chris Whaley." "What do you want?" I'm doing a benefit, and Dory told me to give you a call. "I'll wrestle you for the gate." I said, "Well, it's a benefit for this sweet lady in my church." "I'll wrestle you for half the gate." "Well, Terry, it's a benefit." "No, thanks." Click. That was it.
Oh.
Yeah, he was a funny guy, but you know, he was super nice. You couldn't ask for a greater guy, but man, in the ring, he was just phenomenal. And you know, look how long that guy worked.
Oh, yeah.
Also, you know, he was a great actor too. I mean, he did
Frankie the Thump.
Yep.
Yeah, Over the Top with Stallone. He did Roadhouse with Patrick Swayze. He was in other movies, but yeah, he was a great actor too. I can't say enough about him. But you know, the Funk family, probably the greatest wrestling family in the business. Next, you know, the only one that would even come close would be the Von Erichs.
Right.
But just a great family.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you talked about obviously the ageless wonder that he was with his recent passing. You know, a lot of the
Yeah.
talk of things he did in the ring. He was well known for doing the moonsault, given his age. I think it's
Yeah.
important to note he didn't add the moonsault to his repertoire until he was already in his 40s. So I
Yeah.
mean, you
Yeah.
got guys that stopped doing the moonsault when they hit 40. He was almost 50 when
Yeah.
he started doing it.
Yeah. 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 He was crazy. There wasn't a bump. There wasn't a bump that he wouldn't take. There wasn't anything that he wouldn't attempt. I mean, he was just phenomenal and ageless. I mean, I saw a video not too long ago, and it hadn't been that long ago. And man, it was some kind of interview that went kind of crazy, and he really put the guy over and took some unbelievable bumps and punishment. And he was in his early 70s when he did that. That was just crazy. Of course, Ric Flair, got back in the ring last year at the age of 73. I was just in South Carolina over the weekend. I got to speak at this wrestling event in South Carolina, and the Barbarian worked on that card, and I hadn't seen him in I don't know how long. He's 65, and he took some bumps. I couldn't believe it. I got back in the ring last year at the age of 68 after being out of wrestling for 35 years. And I tell you, I felt it for 2 weeks. So I don't know how some of these guys continue to work. I have no knees. I mean, my knees are shot, my hips are shot, my shoulders are shot, and it's just incredible that you got guys that are still working at a high level that are in their 40s and 50s.
Well, we always start. I know Benny wanted to talk to you, and this is a great question, but we always start with asking about the interest in the wrestling bug, and also I want to start with that. When did the wrestling bug bite you, and who got you interested in wrestling purely from a fan perspective?
Well, I I started watching wrestling when I was a kid in the hospital. I was in the hospital a lot as a child, and there wasn't a lot on TV in those days. And you're in the hospital, you get your days and your nights mixed up. And so late at night, I'm laying there in bed wide awake, and I turn the TV on, and lo and behold, late at night you could find professional wrestling on TV. And of course, they were replays for championship wrestling from Florida with Gordon Soley. And so I watched Eddie Graham against the Great Malenko, and I watched Joe Scarpa against Johnny Valentine, and I just saw some of the greats: Red Bastien, Abe Jacobs, Sam Steamboat. And as a kid, I was just enamored with it. My dad had a third grade education. He was a long distance truck driver and knew nothing about sports. And so he couldn't teach me about, football or baseball or basketball. But even my dad loved professional wrestling. And so when I was not in the hospital and as a kid, I would beg him to take me to wrestling over in Lakeland. I grew up in Central Florida, and over in Lakeland, they would have wrestling on Saturday nights, and got to see some of those great, matches. Bob Orton, not Bob Orton Jr., but Bob Orton, his dad, and just so many great wrestlers from the past that I saw as a kid, and I just got hooked. I loved it. Anytime it was on, I watched it. Anytime I could go to the matches, I did. But I never thought that I would ever be a professional wrestler because of my health. I mean, I was just constantly in and out of the hospital, and skin and bones. I couldn't put weight on. And then finally, this great doctor from my childhood, he refused to give up, and they sent me to Watson Clinic in Lakeland. They started doing a lot of tests on me, and they found out that the reason that my immune system wasn't kicking in was because of all the allergies I had. I had over 200 allergies.
Oh, wow.
And so I started taking allergy medication when I was in junior high school. And all of a sudden, things changed, and I started putting on weight. And then my doctor, he's the one that got me going to the gym. He said, I want you working with weights, and I want you swimming, and I want you doing all this stuff. And I love lifting weights, man. It just became a passion. And so my body began to change. I began to put on weight, began to look, pretty decent. And so even then, I never thought that there was ever a chance that I'd be a professional wrestler. Then my wife and I were in college together, and I was just continuing to work out and continuing to, get in better shape. And we graduated from college and came back to Central Florida. She was a high school math teacher. And so I was working and working out. That's what I was doing. And then when I was 24, I was looking at the Tampa Tribune one day, and there's a big ad in there, wanted professional wrestlers. It was in the sports section. And I jumped up out of my seat, and I ran over to my wife, who was grading papers, and I showed her the ad, and she just kind of rolled her eyes and started back to grading papers. But I immediately went in, I packed a bag, and I drove over to Tampa and walked in, and there was, this guy that I'd watched as a kid, the great Malenko, and he's, wanted to train me. And so that's how it happened. That's how I got hooked on it.
Chris, how did you fare? Because I've heard that we had another guest. His name was Buck Bresner, the American Giant. Probably came a little bit after you, but he trained under Boris Malenko as well. And he said the guy really was a taskmaster. Was that true?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, he meant business when you were there to train and work out. That's what you were there to do. No goofing off or anything like that. And it was kind of neat, because I was training with his sons, Jody and Dean. And so I got to work against Dean and work against Jody, work against some other great guys. And of course, my best friend, one of my best friends today, is Mark Mero, who wrestled with Johnny B. Bad and Marvelous Mark Mero. And he was trained by Malenko also. We've shared our stories with each other, but he just did unbelievably well with the WCW and the WWF. And Malenko, I think he was the best in the business at training wrestlers, but he was also a great guy too. Whenever I left Florida and I went to Texas to go to seminary, I called him up and I said, can you help me? That was the day of the territories, and they did not look very favorably on independents. And if you were an independent trying to get into a territory, it was pretty difficult in those days. You either knew somebody or you were related to somebody to get you in there. And so it was just difficult finding the opportunity to work, coming from an independent position in my life. But when I went to Texas, I called him up and he told me who to talk to in Dallas. I'll never forget. He said, talk to Bronco Lubitsch, and so that was the first person I looked up whenever I went to Texas. And so I was able to get on out there and work. And he was just a great help to me. And I kept in touch with him as much as I could, and it was just a real heartbreak. He died of leukemia, and that was a real heartbreak. But I still see Jody about every other month. They have the Legends Luncheon over in Tampa at O'Brien's Pub, and I got inducted into the Legends thing that they put the names on over there, and every other month they usually have an event there where they induct a couple more people, and so I get to see Jody. He comes to that. Bugsy's usually there. Buddy Colt used to be there until he passed away. B. Brian Blair heads it up. Bob Cook, and there's always some great names over there when you go to those things. So I miss Larry a whole bunch, but man, his legacy is just going to continue to live on for a long time.
Real quick, you mentioned obviously at the time you were training, you got the pleasure of training with his son. Dean Malenko is often regarded as one of the best technical talents of his generation. Was it obvious to you when you were training with them to like, the holy cow, this kid is going to kill it?
Yeah, but Jody was better. I mean, Jody was not only trained by his dad, but he was trained by Carl Gotch. And I mean, he was a bad news bear. I did a match where it was called a takedown match. You got points for takedowns and all. It was a little strange, for professional wrestling, but man, that was one of the most brutal matches I was ever in. Was with Jody. So Dean was great. He ended up being a star. The man of 1,000 holes, but Jody was great in his own right. He was just honored. No, he's going to be honored, I think, next week at Cauliflower Alley, and I think he just accepted an award on behalf of his dad at the Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame in Waterloo, Iowa.
Oh, right.
So a lot of great memories from that guy. I tell you, he was one of the best.
Chris, I believe, if I read the book correctly, your very first match was against Adrian Adonis. Now, most of the younger fans, they remember the bloated version of adorable Adrian Adonis, but I go back a little further than that, and I remember and not only did he look tough, but I heard he was legitimately tough. He was built from Hell's Kitchen, New York. And Keith Frankie, like I said, he had the reputation of being legitimately a tough guy, besides being he was a very talented wrestler. What was it like wrestling him?
Well, he wasn't my first match. My first match was against the Grappler. But I worked against Adrian Adonis. Matter of fact, my first shoulder injury was compliments of him. He was bad news bear in the ring. I think the toughest guy that I ever worked against was Bruiser Brody. I got one of my last concussions from Bruiser Brody, but Adrian, he was right up there with him as far as being pretty, ruthless in the ring. But I was glad I only had to work against him once.
Was it as rough as history and almost legend at this point would make it out to be?
I'm sorry, say it again.
I said the legend of Brody in the ring, how rough and stiff he was to work with. I said, was that true, or is that?
Ooh, yeah. I don't even know how I got home that night. He kicked me in the head. I had a concussion.
Wow.
Concussions, and I don't even know how I got home that night. He was pretty rough. Pretty rough dude.
It's funny. Benny said this is episode 140. And you're not the first guest we've had that's told a story about I locked up with Brody in the ring, and then I woke up at home and don't remember much before that.
Yeah. Oh man, I tell you, he was pretty brutal. He really was. And you know, even though I was in wrestling, I'm also a fan, and I mean I love the matches between him and Abdullah. I mean they were just classic. I tell you, I got to talk with Abby about 3 years ago. I was invited to the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame there in Wichita Falls, Texas. And,
Okay.
so when they picked me up at the airport, they picked Abby up at the airport, and Hands of Stone, what was his name? Hands of Stone.
Ronnie Garvin.
Ron Garvin. Yeah, yeah. So all three of us are riding back to Wichita Falls in the van, and it's just story after story after story, and the majority of the stories were from Abdullah. He had the most, and not only the most stories, but the best stories. You know, I felt kind of, shy. I better just shut up because my stories aren't nothing like these guys.
How much you learned just being in the back seat of some of those old territory road trips.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's for sure. That's for sure.
You know, in a strange way, there are some similarities. But if you were to ask somebody to pick any two vocations that were more divergent than pastor and professional wrestler, they might be hard pressed to find one. So you mentioned, obviously, you had your career. It was about 10 years, Florida to the South, traveled the territories, and then you transitioned to pastor. Was it difficult flipping the switch between the two, or was there some extension? Was the each kind of just some extension of your true self?
You know, when I was in wrestling, I never had a problem with depression. Never had a problem with anxiety or anything like that. I got to work it out in the ring. And so when I went from wrestling to becoming a pastor, that was the big difference. I wasn't able to work my anxiety out like I used to, you know, in the ring. But not long after I became a pastor, and believe me, when you go to seminary, I was in seminary for 3 years, getting my Master of Divinity. You learn a lot of great stuff in seminary. You have to learn languages. You know, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, the New Testament was written in Greek and in Aramaic, and so you have to learn the languages and, you know, history, and you learn education, you learn counseling, you learn a lot of stuff, but they don't teach you how to be a pastor. And so I'm kind of learning on the job doing that. And then I had this precious young lady that would drop her kids off at our children's program, and she would come into the sanctuary. She was usually the last one in the sanctuary, and she was the first one to leave. But one particular Sunday, which wasn't long after I became the pastor of this church, she came in with sunglasses on. And I thought that was a little strange, but, you know, some people, I guess, do that. And so I finished the service, and I'm standing at the front shaking hands. And on this particular day, she was the last person to leave. And when she came up to me, she grabbed my hand with both of her hands and had her head down, and I could see tears coming down her cheeks. And I reached over and lifted her sunglasses, and she had two black eyes. And it just infuriated me. Any man that would hit a woman is a dirtbag, and bullies only pick on people they know that they can beat. And so I just said, you know, I talked to her. I said, "Your husband do this?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, I'm going to go see him." And she said, "Well, he'll hurt you." And I said, "Well, I'm not really worried about it." And so I went to their house, and I called him out. I just said, you know, I came by to see how you would do against somebody who was able to fight back. And so we danced in his front yard, and I relieved a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. And it was a lot of fun, being able to do that. And then it just started happening where I had episode after episode where I was handling people more as a professional wrestler than as a pastor. And so, my first few years in the ministry, even though I was out of professional wrestling, I was still using professional wrestling on some people who were bad people. And that's how my book, The Masked Saint, came about. All it is just episode after episode of things that happened to me in the ministry, and how I responded to it and did that, and so that's how the Masked Saint came to be. But the wrestling, it actually prepared me for the ministry. I mean, you don't get into the ring unless you're prepared. You certainly don't get behind the pulpit unless you're prepared. You deal with difficult people in the ministry. You deal with difficult people as a pastor, and so there was a lot of similarities to it. And plus, when it came out that I was a professional wrestler, it causes some people who might be a problem to decide not to be a problem because they don't want to get decked,
So Chris, this is going to be, I don't know if you ever seen the movie Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield. When he takes his final exam, Professor Philip Barbet said, "I only have one question with 37 parts." So this is going to be my Philip Barbet question. Not really, but so I've watched a lot of really good wrestling movies in my lifetime, and I actually did not see The Masked Saint until a couple of days ago, but I would recommend that to anyone. What a movie! But the movie I'm talking about right now is 350 Days, which was a documentary chronicling the anecdotes and road stories of many of the former older wrestlers. But there was a gentleman in that movie who I really didn't know was a wrestler. His name was Howard Jerome, and he made the statement, which has stuck with me for years now. There's a fundamental longing in the human heart to see good triumph over evil. So the fact that you played the Masked Saint, you played a man of God. Does that make the dynamic a little bit different? Because you're not just fighting. It's not good versus evil, but you're actually fighting the battle for God. And then the second part of the question is, I'm not sure how much of the current product you do watch, but those lines, the good versus evil lines, they've become completely blurred. And in my opinion, so is the lines of society. And I use the example of Tim Tebow, who's one of my all-time favorite athletes, played for the Florida Gators. But he was ridiculed by so many people just because he publicly professed his faith. And then John Cena always was booed by at least half the crowd, even though he made, I don't know how many, countless Make-A-Wish Foundation. He spent so much of his time with Make-A-Wish. So do you think that modern-day wrestling is simply mirroring modern society?
That's a great question, and I think there's a lot to that question because when I got out, I was still a fan. Still wanted to see my friends on TV and stuff, and still wanted to keep up with people. But Vince McMahon kind of changed. He changed wrestling when he took over the WWF. From his dad. Vince is a major marketer. I mean, he is just an unbelievable marketer. And so he took this little territory, the WWF, and made it into a multi-billion-dollar business when he took wrestling national and international. He signed with NBC and USA, and of course he was the first one to do pay-per-view. And early on, there was just some great stuff on there, but the longer he stayed there, I think the more dark wrestling became, and just a lot of stuff that I just didn't want to see it, so I quit watching it. That's why when I was in Blackjack's hospital room and he introduced me to his grandsons, they were major stars in the WWE. Bray Wyatt, Bo Dallas.
Bo Dallas,
and
right?
I didn't even know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't even know who they were. So because I quit watching it, and I just started back. Jeff Jarrett was really gracious in helping to promote the movie, The Masked Saint, and so I got to know Jeff Jarrett and communicate with him, and I saw that the AEW was going to be in Tampa a couple weeks ago, and I sent him a text and said, "Hey, you guys never come to Florida, and I see you're in Tampa. You mind if I come over?" And he texted me back and said, "Come on over. I'd love to see you." And so I went over there, and of course, the only ones I knew, Dustin Rhodes. I saw Dean Malenko for the first time in 30 years. And Chris Jericho, but besides that, I just didn't know a lot of those guys, and it's kind of embarrassing not knowing it. And then watching their show, it was just unbelievable. One match, it's nothing breaking tables. We broke tables in my day, but I mean, to throw thumbtacks on the mat and body slam somebody on thumbtacks, I mean,
Right.
that's just crazy. That's stuff they do in backyard wrestling matches, and I just never thought I would see that. But it's just, in our day, you had good guys against bad guys, and usually the good guys won. And it's just a lot different today, especially some of the language that they use and stuff. I mean, I have grandkids now, and I wouldn't want to take my grandkids and let them hear some of the things that they say on those microphones, and certainly don't want them watching it on TV. So it's sad to see what it has become today, and that's why I like a lot of the independent shows that really have some great talent today. But a lot of them are just getting back to the old school way of doing things. And I'm glad to see that.
You talk about the transition. Do you mean to tell me you never worked when you were with the Malenkos? You never worked on how to take a bump through a pile of light bulbs, or?
Nope. I think if you'd have said something to Larry about doing something like that, he would have thrown you out and said, "No need for you to come back."
You were talking about being on the road, Benny. What do you think if a kid were to show up in the locker room and tell Abdullah or Bruiser Brody that I'm going to cut you with a pizza cutter and then hit you over the head with a light bulb? You think that kid would have enough bones not broken in his legs to walk home? Or
I could only imagine what he'd look like by the time they were done with him.
They like that. That's funny.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to try that myself.
Not Brody or Abdullah. No way.
Yeah.
That's why it cracks me up when I see interviews or hear interviews with talent today, and they almost are proud of the fact that you were just, you were telling the story about sitting in the back seat of the car and listening, and some of these kids today talk like they're almost proud that they don't take advice. Oh, we got plenty of veterans in the locker room. I don't listen to those old coots. They don't know what real wrestling is like.
Yeah. No, I'm still learning. I'm 69 and I'm still learning. But I want to learn from everybody who can teach me something. And I mean, the guys that I sought out when I was in wrestling were the ones who'd been in the business for a long time. Yep. And I wanted their critique, and I wanted their advice, and say, hey, did I do that? Did I do that bump good? I mean, would you change anything? What would you say to help make me better? I mean, I always wanted to be better. Every time I got in the ring, I wanted to be better than I was the time before. And one of the best ways is getting, advice from people who've been doing it a lot longer than you and who are a lot more successful, So you can never stop learning. So that's sad, with the young talent today that doesn't want to learn from the older talent.
Heck, one of our very first episode, we got to interview Dominic DiNucci, and he would tell us the stories that some of the legends like Bruno and Lou Thez would occasionally peek around the corner and take notes on matches. I mean, these were guys that were considered the best of all time, and they still never wanted to stop learning.
Right. Yeah, and that's why they were great. That's
Right.
why they were great and stayed great, is because they were always looking for an edge, always looking to be better, always wanting to do a better job the next time they got in the ring than the last time they got in the ring.
Right.
And I'm very, very thankful that my mind and my heart was open to that, because I don't think I would have lasted 10 years with an attitude that a lot of guys have today.
Speaking of legends, I know this might sound odd because we were talking about you wrestled with the mask, and there was another wrestler who wrestled under a mask to hide his identity. He wrestled as the Student. Real name, his real life students knew him as Jim Myers. Anybody who's ever watched wrestling knew him as George the Animal Steele, one of my all-time favorites. Yeah. Did you ever have the pleasure of meeting or working with him? Because I know he did spend his later years in Florida.
No, I didn't, and it was sad. I had friends that knew him, and I had friends. Matter of fact, there was one time I was supposed to meet him, and it didn't work out, and I was just very sad for that. But he was such a great talent. I love watching him work, and he was quite a guy. Even after wrestling, man, he was just super. I never heard. He's another one I never heard a negative thing about.
No, sir. So, Chris, when I read the book, and I grew up in Long Island, New York, and my lifelong hero has been Bruno Sammartino. But there's a lot of parallels between you and Bruno. Bruno grew up during World War II, got sick in the mountains of Italy with rheumatic fever. And I mean, when he came to America at the age of 14, I think he weighed 83 pounds. But you struggled a good part of your childhood with illness. And you both overcame, serious illness to become professional wrestlers. Did you ever meet Bruno?
No, never met Bruno. He was up in the Northeast, and I never went up to the Northeast. I stayed in the southeastern United States, and Texas, or Louisiana, Mississippi, Oklahoma, but never made it up north because, of course, my last 3 years, I'm going to seminary in the daytime and wrestling at night. So that pretty much consumed that of staying in the area. So I didn't get to do that. But I had the greatest respect for Bruno Sammartino. I mean, man, there wouldn't be a WWF had it not been for Bruno Sammartino. And he was just an unbelievable athlete. And I think, he was the Hulk Hogan of his day.
Sure. But, it's really funny that you had similar remarks. He said that the first time he set foot in a gym, I think he was 15 or 16 in Pittsburgh. And he said, I knew there was something in this for me. I knew that something good would become of this. And it sounded very similar to what I read in your book.
Yeah. Well, hey, I was never any kind of a star the way, Bruno Sammartino or so many others that I could name for you. I felt very fortunate just to be able to do what I was able to do. But you always have those people like Bruno and, the Funks Dory Funk Jr. My goodness, look at the legacy of the Funk family and the Von Erichs. Man, the Von Erichs. Yeah, when I was in Texas, of course, number one thing in Texas was the Cowboys, and number two were the Von Erichs.
Von Erichs, yeah.
I mean, they were just revered, and Kerry got away with some stuff that I was dumbfounded. He was running late to a show one time and called the local sheriff's office and said, "Hey, it's Kerry Von Erich, and I'm supposed to be working here. Can you help me out?" And a deputy sheriff met him on the highway and gave him an escort to the arena. I mean, try that in Florida.
Yeah.
You can't do that. So I just felt, very, very blessed to be able to be around the ones that I was, and to have the opportunities that I had. And I got out of wrestling really at the height of my career. I was 34 years old when I graduated from seminary in 1988 and went to my first church. So at the time when I was just starting to really, make a difference and getting some good work and all, I gave it up, to go and pursue. Wrestling was my dream, but ministry was my calling, and I had to fulfill that calling, which I've done for 35 years since wrestling. But still had a blessed life, and still got that fire in me for wrestling, and I still love the fact that one day, I'm hoping it's going to return to what it used to be, and it's always going to be, it's always going to be great. You look at, there's not a night that you turn the TV on that you can't find wrestling. I mean, you think about that. Wrestling is on just about every night.
Right.
You have, WWE, you got AEW, and you got probably 1,000 independent shows going on all over the nation. So it's not dying, man. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chris, two of my absolute favorite performers in the movie were Diane Carroll, who played Miss Edna, and Roddy Piper, who played the shady promoter, Nikki Stone. Now, most people remember Diane Carroll as the heel, Dominique Devereaux, in the movie Dynasty, in the TV show Dynasty. But I'm going to date myself a little bit because I remember her from when I was, I guess, probably about 13. She was in a show called Julia. She played a single mom and a nurse. And now, and what can anybody say about Roddy Piper that hasn't already been said? I do believe that he passed away not too long after the movie was made. So another multiple part question: were you involved in the production of the movie? And if so, how was it working with both of them? And as far as the real Miss Edna, I know in the movie Miss Edna was in the church when you were a pastor. In the book, Miss Edna was your childhood mentor. What was the Miss Edna in the book the historical Miss Edna?
Right. Yeah. For the movie, they brought her up to real time, and I didn't like that part of it, but that's movie business. They do that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But no, she was from my childhood. I met her when I was 8 years old, and which was really unusual for a white kid in the South in the 60s.
In the 60s, right? Yes.
To have a black mentor, that was really just unheard of. But she was just the most precious lady. She didn't live too far from us, where I grew up, and she was a godly woman. And she loved to quote Edmund Burke: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing."
Do nothing, right?
And she kind of burned that into my heart growing up, and I grew up with that. And even today, I just can't stand to see evil prevail. And when I see things happening that I can make a difference and do something, I'm going to do that. I'll probably, be on the news one day. Old professional wrestler gets killed doing, trying to help somebody. But that'll be a great way to go out, because I don't mind that. And it's really incredible that I didn't get killed doing that. All of those things that happened that you read about in the book. I mean, that every chapter is built upon real life.
Well, didn't you
with the
walk into
clan.
a clan meeting in the woods, and there was like 4 or 5 of those
Yeah.
guys? It's just you.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a real shocker to go to your church and find out, you had clan members there. But, it was just great, relying on all of those things that I learned from her. I just learned so much from her, and she was so precious. But Diane Carroll was such a sweetheart. When the movie was made, she was 79 years old.
Wow.
And
She looked
was
great.
starting, I know, she was gorgeous, and she was starting to deal with dementia. They had to get a teleprompter for her to do her lines with, because she couldn't remember the lines. And but she was just really sweet, and gave me a hug every time I saw her, and she did a great job. Roddy Piper, oh my goodness, it had been 25 years since I had seen Roddy. I worked against him like 25 years before this, and I was so excited whenever I found out that they had cast him as Nicky Stone. And the first day on the set, when I saw him, it was so great, to reconnect. And he was still in great shape, man. This was 2013, 10 years ago, when the movie was filmed in November of 2013, and he was still in great shape. He looked great. He always looked great. He always looked classy. But he was not only was he an unbelievable wrestler, he was a great actor. I mean, if you IMDb him, you'll just see countless TV and movies, that he did. And of course, his first big one was They Live. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that line in there. He said, I'm chewing bubble gum and kicking butt, and I'm fresh out of bubble gum. But he was just a great, great guy. If you watch any of his matches on YouTube, you'll see that he always wrestled with his wedding ring. He never took his wedding ring off. And he always wanted to be home on the weekend to be with his family.
Very devoted
to his family. Yeah, very devoted to his family. So it was just tragic. The movie was filmed in November of 13, and then he passed away, I think, July 31st in 2014. And we were just shocked and devastated. He didn't get to see the movie hit the theaters. Probably never got to see the director's cut of the movie. But, man, what a thrill in my heart to know that, my movie was the last one that he did.
One of my favorite movies, especially the sports themed movies, is Rudy. At the end of the movie, the real Rudy Rudiger makes a cameo and he's sitting behind the family in the stadium. There's also, the real Aaron Brockovich plays a waitress serving Julia Roberts. You've got Frank Abagnale is in Catch Me If You Can. The Wolf of Wall Street. There's numerous biography movies where, of course, Jerry Lawler playing himself in Man on the Moon. There's numerous biography movies where the real person cameos. So I'm curious. You pulled a Rudy, right? Were you in the crowd for The Saint? Were you in the crowd in that movie?
I was at the very excuse me, at the very end of the movie, during that before the cage match starts. They shined the camera on me, and I'm clapping, and then I had one line in the movie, "You got him, Saint," and I got to say that. So I was sitting there at ringside when it was being taped, and got a cameo in it. That was kind of a thrill. But they were so good to me and let me. I was on the set of the movie from the beginning, until it ended,
Oh, wow.
and got to be there for all of the taping, and it was just a great experience. And I'm hoping that there's a possibility. Netflix is really looking for faith-based movies, faith-based series. And they could actually take the book and get an episode off of each chapter. So
Sure.
I'm hoping that it comes
Great.
to that, and they get to do that. But it's just a big thrill, Benny and Dan, to get to do what I did. I had to pinch myself, man, when it was going on. That this little book that I wrote actually was made into a movie that won Best Picture at the 2015 International Christian Film Festival. So
Wow.
That's awesome.
Just very, very blessed.
Yeah, we can completely relate. I mean, Benny has to pinch himself regularly when he realizes he's still working with me. So,
Except that at my age, I have to watch for blood clots, so I don't pinch myself too tight.
That's funny. I love that.
Chris, I'm of the utmost opinion that everything in life has some kind of correlation to professional wrestling. So even my granddaughter Lila will watch somebody on TV, and I'll say, is that a baby face or a heel? I mean, wrestling it permeates my entire life, kind of like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So I wanted to ask you, what's the similarity between a sermon and a promo?
Well, I think preparation. You want to be prepared for both of those. I never wanted to get into the pulpit. The movie, they did some funny stuff in the movie. For one thing, I never had a choir that sounded as gosh awful as the choir sounded in that movie. And I was not as bad of a preacher as they made me out to be in the movie.
I was going to ask you about that. They painted you as very awkward in the beginning.
Yeah. I was not, man. I was ready to, when the lights came on the camera, I was ready. And so I had no problem, standing in the pulpit and preaching, but I wanted to be prepared. I wanted to make sure I was prepared to give what I was going to do on that day. And the same thing with promos, man, and interviews. You want to make sure that when the light turned on that camera, you were ready to give it your best, and that's what I did. And there's a lot of similarities between professional wrestling and just everyday life. I do that myself, Benny. I really do. I look at. I'm a big Trump fan. Donald Trump. People got mad when he would say things. I was in professional wrestling for 10 years, man, and got my feelings hurt all the time. So it doesn't bother me when he gets up and says stuff. He was a baby face, but a lot of people made him out to be a heel.
Yep.
That's the way it is in life. You deal with baby faces and heels every day. So it's a lot of similarities. I think you got something there when you look at life like that.
Well, I mean, as we wrap up here, Chris, so many great stories. You talked about the book, you talked about the movie, but tell our listeners and our friends on YouTube where they can find your books. And I say books because I want you to talk a little bit about your Christmas book as well, and where they can find the Masked Saint movie.
Okay. Hey, thanks for asking that. By the way, I'm going to tell you didn't ask for this, but I wrote a third book with an old wrestling buddy. When he was in wrestling, he wrestled as the evil Prince of Naka. His real name is Mike McClaskey, and Mike and I actually got into wrestling together. We've stayed friends all these years, and when Mike got out of wrestling, he did a lot of work in movies. He was a stunt man, and then he learned how to write movie scripts, and he's written several scripts and stuff. And so we did a book together. It was actually a script for a movie that we had hoped The Rock would do. It's called Mr. President, and it parallels two lives. So there's a sleazy comedian. His name is Timmy Connors, and he grows up from a bad home life, and he grows up to be a comedian. And he runs for president every 4 years. There used to be a comedian by the name of Pat Paulson.
Oh yeah, on the Smothers Brothers.
Yeah, so he runs for president every 4 years, and when he's doing this, he gets autographs from celebrities, and what the celebrities are actually signing, or when they think they're giving an autograph, they're actually signing an agreement to be his vice presidential candidate. And he gets a lot of publicity out of those celebrities. And then the other life is a young African-American kid that grows up with a good mom, and he wants to be the world heavyweight wrestling champion. And he grows up to be the world champion. And Timmy Connors gets an autograph from Butch Vernon is his name in the movie, but I mean in the book. But he gets his autograph, and so he signed the agreement to be the vice presidential candidate for Timmy Connors. And of course, they get a lot of publicity out of that. And then there's a big scandal with the Democrats and the Republicans, and the comedian wins the presidency. And when he's making his acceptance speech, he has a heart attack, and it thrusts the world heavyweight champion into the presidency. And then he starts putting his wrestling buddies in his cabinet, and it just turns Washington upside down. It's a
that's great
political comedy. It's hilarious. It is so. Every time I reread it, I just crack up from
I like
the
that
stuff we put in there. And it's coming out Black Friday, Thanksgiving week. It's coming out, called Mr. President with a question mark. And so just wanted to tell you that one. But if you like the book is really the real story. You can get it cheaper on Amazon or one of those other places where you buy books online. But if you want an autographed copy, you can go to my website, which is themasksaint.com, and I'll be glad to send you an autographed copy. And I've got other things on there. I've got Masked Saint T-shirts, but the Christmas book, you get kind of spoiled when you write a book and it's made into a movie. And I was thinking, what would have the best chance of being made into a movie? My wife and I, we kind of hooked on those Christmas movies that play on the Hallmark Channel, and now they have the Great American Channel, and they show Christmas movies 24/7 starting at the end of October, and they show them all the way to the first week of January. So I had a great idea for a Christmas story, and I wrote it. I love the book. Did you like the movie It's a Wonderful Life?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, Harold's Heavenly Christmas. Harold is the new Clarence, and it's better than anything on Hallmark or on the Great American Channel. It's a great Christmas story, and if you like Christmas, you'll love that book. But the DVD, you can also get that on Amazon. But I have the Canadian copy of the DVD. And the Canadian copy of the DVD has the behind-the-scenes stuff. It's got Roddy Piper doing interviews. It's got Diane Carroll doing interviews. And every one of the characters in the movie does an interview. It's also got the song that the young lady did a great job of singing. It's on there. And they have interviews with me and with Brett Grandstaff, who plays me in the movie. So I have those. So you can't get those on Amazon. You can only get those from me. But you can get that off of my website also.
Now, regions being what they are, will that Canadian DVD play in an American DVD player?
Oh yeah. I play it on mine. It's the same, DVD. It's just a better edition than the one that came out in America. The movie was filmed in Sault Ste. Marie, Canada. It's kind of interesting, when I wrote the book, I had a producer here in Orlando who he was actually the producer of the first 3 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies, the ones that were blockbusters. He did those, and he did a movie with Jim Caviezel. It was a golfing movie called Stroke of Genius, the Bobby Jones story. So he produced that one, and then he started doing faith-based movies. He did a movie called Letters to God. So he was very interested in my book, and I met with him. They had a script written. He kept me on the hook for about a year, and then all of a sudden he just changed his mind. But during that year, I met a lot of people in the movie business and a lot of producers and script writers. And so when he got through with me, another producer called me, and he kept me on the hook for a little bit, and then he changed his mind, and I was getting kind of annoyed with it. And I was ready to put my book up on the shelf and just let my grandkids pull it off one day and say, look what Papa wrote. But I was on my way to the gym in February of 2013. I was on my way to the gym, and my phone rang, and I answered it, and he identified himself. He said, I'm a producer here in Toronto. Has anybody done anything with your book? And I rolled my eyes when I said no, because, he couldn't see me. But I said, no, nobody's done anything. He said, okay. He said, well, I'll get back with you in a couple of weeks. And I said, yeah, right. Okay, bye. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, I was on my way back to the gym, and my phone rang, and it was that producer. And he said, are you sitting down? And I said, matter of fact, I am. I'm driving. And he said, well, let me get you to pull off the side of the road. And so I did. And he said, hey, we're going to make your book into a movie. I've already got a script writer. We're working on the script and planning to shoot the movie in July, which they didn't because the script wasn't ready. They ended up filming it in the month of November of 2013. And so, lo and behold, it got made. And I was just dumbfounded after all of that disappointment that it actually turned out and it happened. And so that's how it happened.
Well, Benny, as we I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to say, as we wrap up, last question to you.
Yeah, Chris, I was read on Facebook several days ago that you wanted to organize a Christian wrestling event. So if you could, I don't want to jump the gun, but anything you can tell us about that? And is there any way we can volunteer or donate?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I was actually working towards doing that earlier this year. I started talking last year. There's a couple of Christian wrestling organizations. I have a friend, Marty Miller, who's in Georgia, and his is called Hope Championship Wrestling. And he's got all Christian professional wrestlers. And then another friend of mine, Richie Scruggs, has Wrestling for Christ in North Carolina. And it's just so neat. I get invited to some of these events. And last year I went in March to one of Marty's events. And during intermission, Nikita Koloff and myself got in the ring and shared our testimonies. And it was just a great evening, and, saw people come to know the Lord that night. It was a great, great event. And so when my wife and I were driving home, I got this idea that I said, there's WrestleMania, but in my day, I didn't know any other Christians. I really didn't. I was kind of an anomaly. I'd go into the dressing room and find a corner. After the show, they went to the strip bars and they went out drinking. I went home to my wife and my girls. It was a different lifestyle for me. I didn't get involved in that. So now you have a lot of Christian professional wrestlers. Ted DiBiase, very dedicated Christian, the $1 Million Man. You have Nikita Koloff, who was an 8-time champion. You have Lex Luger, the total package. Lex is now a very dedicated Christian, and myself. I have a good friend, Dr. Jimmy McDowell. That's a guy you ought to interview too. Jimmy is the AIWA heavyweight champion, but he's also a dentist. He's a dentist, and he's a professional wrestler. His motto is, "I knock teeth out at night and I put them back in the daytime." But I thought, how cool would it be to have, a night where you have all these Christian wrestlers. And I was also going to have Hector Guerrero on that too. Hector is a very dedicated Christian guy. And, show videos of their past and the wrestling, and then have them, get up and tell how they came to know Christ as Lord and Savior of their life. And, have some great music and just make it an unbelievable event, because there's a lot of wrestling fans in Florida. So I started it. I had people on board, and then all of a sudden it just kind of died. And it was very depressing, and it really hurt me that we weren't able to do it. And then a couple of weeks ago in my prayer time, I just, you know what, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it. And so, you have to have a big building. You have to have the finances. Yeah, these guys aren't in it for the money, but you got to pay them something. You got to pay for their travel. You got to have a car for them, a hotel, their food. You got to pay for the building, the air conditioning, the security. There's just a lot of costs to doing it. And so I've got to raise the money to do it. Got to find the right building, but I know we've got the guys that we can bring together. The Undertaker. You didn't ask me about the Undertaker. So the Undertaker is now a very dedicated Christian, and I don't. He would probably cost too much money.
So you wrestled the Undertaker in a 20-minute match, right?
Yeah, I did, man. That was 1988, February 1988. Of course, he wasn't working as the Undertaker, but
Still.
The guy's like 6'8", 315 pounds, got an unbelievable wingspan. You read the chapter in the book.
Oh yeah,
about the Undertaker. That's a true story. My wife, I asked her, I said, "What were you doing?" She said, "I was looking for the checkbook, make sure you'd paid the insurance." That was a great night. But anyway, I'm hoping it's going to come about, and the more, if I get more information, I'll be sure to let you know.
Please, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, I just want to thank you guys so much for having me. It's just incredible that even though I've been out wrestling 35 years, I still get to. There's not a week that goes by that I don't get some kind of message, either on Facebook or an email from somebody who watched the movie or read my book. I have people, I serve on staff here at First Baptist Orlando, and I have people that drive here from all over the United States just to meet me and get me to sign their book, which is really amazing. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had this couple from Des Moines, Iowa, that flew all the way to Orlando just to meet me. So I'm still so blessed and still get to be a part of professional wrestling and the ministry. So just very, very thankful. And it's shows like yours that keep it going. And so I just really can't thank you enough for having me. And I hope the interview was okay.
Absolutely. I think it was great. I mean,
It was great.
even if you're, how to word this, even if you're not, open to the narrative, the message that you're trying to send, it's still a wonderful story. And actually, it's really uplifting in the fact that, the little boy from Florida that came, came up through the ranks and did everything. It's great stuff. So, Chris Whaley, thank you again so much for being here. For those listening and watching, Amazon, Chris, you have your own author page. The book is obviously The Masked Saint, and then you spoke of Harold's Heavenly Christmas. Those can be found on Amazon, and I look forward to your Mr. President getting a chance to read that. That sounds incredible. And of course, like you said, themaskedsaint.com for the movies. So, Chris Whaley, again, thank you so much. For our friends at YouTube, Monty and the Pharaoh, of course, Dan and Benny in the Ring can be heard anywhere podcasts can be listened to. He's Chris Whaley, the Masked Saint. He's the Long Island Iced B, Benny Scala. I'm Dan Sebastiano. Have a good night, everyone, and we will see you next time we're in the ring.